So I'm Chris Paap. I'm the product manager for Virtualization Manager. I've been the product manager for about 2 years now. And I've worked with Steven and of course, Chris O'Brien quite extensively over the last couple of years. And as Steven said, kind of the segue into this is with SAM 6.4, we're introducing, and vMan 7.1, Virtualization Manager 7.1, we're introducing cloud monitoring. So its ability to connect into the actual, let me get out of this, the actual CloudWatch metrics in order to pull them into Orion. So our newest feature today is we started with Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, obviously. So what we're doing is we're plugging into the CloudWatch API and pulling those metrics into Orion itself. Right off the bat, what you see here is general Orion summary status, cloud instance summary status. You'll notice that some of the things in here, there's some discrepancies in data, and that's for a good reason. You'll notice like you'll have CPU load, obviously, but we don't get memory data usage from Amazon EC2 instances from CloudWatch, but you'll notice that we have memory data available here for this AMI.AWS instance. And I'll dig into that and I'll kind of explain the differences and how we're gathering that data and the differences between once you pull it in from the CloudWatch data, then you can add it as a node and get additional metrics on top of that. And so you can start polling and monitoring node status details as well as application detail status. But right off the bat, when you come into it, we do have a cloud instance here. We actually show the typical instance information. We're showing it's critical. We're keeping in line with the typical Orion details that something is in fact wrong. You know, red is bad, green is good type of thing. We're showing the typical configuration details, hardware details, pretty much static information that we get on your Orion instance. You'll also know here, like one of the main things is manages an instance node. So this is not taking into account any Orion licensing. You just get this as part of it. The reason for that is we are just pulling this data in, and we're taking what AWS is giving us. We do get, with our cloud monitoring, we get attached storage, so elastic block storage we will get as well, and we can alert on any cloud instance details. We have here, the reason this was red, it's showing that CPU load was past the threshold. It's a typical, we kept the fill real familiar, typical what you would see with the typical node status. And then you'll see all off to the side here what we have with storage performance. We see that the write throughput is high at this point as well for the baseline of this machine. We do have different tabs as you go through here, and this was an example of a cloud instance that is not a node. As we go back through here, let me show you what one looks like that has been actually added, and some of the slight differentiations and some added detail. So again, you'll see your cloud information like we saw before. But then what you get now is you'll notice that in the summary, the add node details was gone. And so you'll get the typical app stack view, which has been prevalent in several versions now of Orion. And you'll get some additional details, such as some custom polling and properties that you can now set on that. If it's set, so you can do that for specificity in your alerting. There we go. In this particular instance, you see conversations, like NTA details, top conversations in terms of bandwidth usage. So again, this is another node-specific information as we added the node agent on this particular asset. If we click on the app stack and go to the application, we'll notice that Apache is actually installed in here, and we're actually running SAM component monitors on this. So all the different Apache monitors that are part of the template are actually running on the server and monitoring and identifying. Earlier, right before I came up here, it actually showed that we were actually having transaction monitors. So this is actually being monitored with WPM as well. So on top of the data that we get with CloudWatch, we're kind of assimilating that and then tying it in with what we already do with Orion. So if you had, believe what was showing up just a little while ago, My Home for AWS was actually showing up that it was it was actually running slower than average for end user status and availability. And here's the fixed disk usage as well. So this is the EBS storage details that we are now getting. So as you're digging into, if you're having an issue and you're having a problem, this host is not having problems right now, but if you are having a problem with this host, it would identify where that is by showing where the status, the critical node status would be. We do show percent used, the typical information that you get, the polling interval of what it's set at. The polling interval is, it can be managed in settings just like you could with any node. You can go through and set that to more granular. By default, I believe it's set to, I think, a 10-minute polling interval to pull the API details. Yes. Yes, sir.
This entire demonstration, you showed a handoff between, I think, 3 now, roles within a technology organization and handing over the troubleshooting. In the system, either on-premise or in your SaaS application, is the system logging the click path can it be configured to log the click path and the path that each of your users has used to explore the system? First question. Second question, is it logged by default? Third question, how does that data, can that data come out of the system in a way that is correlated with the URL strings, the data that's pulled out?
So the click path data is not collected as of today. That's not something that we have today. So in regards to the other two, no, like it's obviously not default and we're not able to get it. With WPM data, we are able to get, in fact, you can set transactions and do like a model of where it's clicked through and set a baseline, but not actual real-time user where they're actually clicking on the actual website.
Okay. Is that a technical limitation or just a feature that's not exposed?
It's just a feature that's not exposed today. So, but like with WPM, what we would do is you'd record a transaction if you were trying to kind of model that transaction on, say, if it was a financial transaction and you click through it, and then you would click that through and it would record it, and then it'd keep that baseline. And every time somebody went through that same model, it would then see like where that baseline, if you had a problem in that series, or we call them steps, it would identify where that problem occurred and where that failed in that transaction, the web transaction.
Okay.
But in terms of actually clicking through, if somebody was going live on that and then logging that what somebody was doing, no, we don't collect that.
And the reason that I asked this question, so one of the, how do we teach, right? You're teaching us by showing us. And by hopefully we in the customer set and us inside, if we use in our infrastructure, I was assuming showing us how we can get value, how we can get the most value out of the product. Have you all considered capturing and gathering that ClickPath data to train your models so you can present a suggested view to junior members of a technical skill set in the organization?
I know since I've been here, it was something that we looked at early on, but I don't believe it's something that we've kind of approached since. It is actually, and for that specific use case, no. Okay. For training, no. It is a good example of how that would be used, but no, I have not.
Well, not really training, just making so your junior guy gets woken up at 2 a.m. in the morning has the same information that a senior would get presented. And you could literally sell a feature that would keep people asleep at night. I'd pay for it.
I would pay.
Yeah, I see that as one of the challenges here is that this is essentially a very data-centric product, but the end user has a problem they need to solve. And this is generically something I see in all of the management products is because you're gathering so much data, you see the data as being the most useful thing, but the data is a necessary evil in the same way that a backup is a necessary evil. If I don't have it, I can't do my job, but I need to do my job, doing my job to the front of this.
And that's actually a very good point. And that's easy to get lost in that data. And that's what we are finding. We're getting back from our end users and our customers and people that are evaluating. There's lots of products out there where they get lost in the data, but they're trying to find out in context of that data how that applies to them. And that's
Chris?
kind of a $1 million question.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but I've been working with the UX a lot on that recently, so I have some opinions about that. So the way that we approach that problem is more to do UX studies, and I'll get to the telemetry next, but to do UX studies, and rather than trying to train a new user to use a complex path, to just simplify the path and make it intuitive. So we do that before we release any product. That would be the key solution that we see. On the other hand, there's absolutely opportunity with telemetry to sort of get a different sort of quantitative way to look at that that we need to do more of. And so we're looking at things like user voice and our own building it right into our platform, all that sort of stuff too.
So I'll ask you a question. What would be the value to SolarWinds if the customers who use this in real time, especially through your SaaS platform, could be providing you UX study feedback for every single release that you put through? What could your product managers gather by having, I think I wrote down, devices managed equal to 1/60th of the United States population? What value could be shared between these customers by expanding that UX study voluntarily to their everyday interactions?
Yeah, so I have a lot of opinions about that, none of which I can share here. But let's talk offline about the tooling. I'd love your input.
I'd love to hear your answers.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
But actually, those are all good points. It's kind of what, just to kind of put a kind of dot on that. I just came off a user session with somebody yesterday, and when they were talking through, like, the problem they had was they were actually, with their current products that they were using, they had a lot of different products, like best of breed, and they just had so much that they were trying to figure out where the problem was. They still didn't know where the problem was, let alone deciphering what was the right data to even look at. So they knew they had an answer in there, they just didn't know where it was.
Yeah, and I want to make sure to explicitly clarify, this is not knocking on anything. I think what you're showing is really, really great.
No, thank you. But it is a salient point. And, like, all right, like, there's what we have figured out the hard way. Just because you put more counters up doesn't make it a better product, right? Just because you have more data up, it's we may be collecting it, but what are we exposing so you're not overwhelmed?
How do you create information out of the data?
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of moving forward, was there any more questions about the cloud? It was pretty straightforward. Like today, just to kind of reiterate, it is AWS. We are moving we're looking forward to new versions of more data that might be coming in that we can include in this, and then as well as other cloud providers as well. And kind of where this kind of ties in with vMan, this does come in with vMan, Virtualization Manager, as well as cloud. The cloud portion is also available with SAM, but where it kind of brings it home to my product more than just that is, to your point, what we were trying to do with Virtualization Manager of finding data that's important to the customer without overwhelming them. We went through the process that Chris O'Brien was talking about, where we actually had multiple versions of when we came out with recommendations, and we had a very complex recommendation engine that we came out with, and everything that all the product managers that worked on this product thought that the customer needed actually fell flat. And the reason for that is we tried to overwhelm them with, like, a lot of shock and awe, like, ooh, look at this graph. And sometimes we misjudged where the customer was actually thinking we thought they knew what they already needed, and then where we underestimated what they already knew about their environment. So we went back to the drawing board and scaled it back, and pretty much kind of drew in line with what we're doing today with just our alerts and recommendations. When you go into recommendations today, we line it up with two types of recommendations. The two types of recommendations that we have, one is active recommendations, and the other one is predictive recommendations. And the differentiation between the two is, although we can provide predictive recommendations, and we do after 7 days worth of data, we try to tell you to get ahead of an issue and resolve an issue with a real specific recommendation, whether it's move a VM or reconfigure that VM. What we also know is that there's always changes in the environment, and we tie those into our alerts. So if you have an alert, the logical next step was in how do you resolve that alert? So it's an after the fact. So one's post-issue, and the other predictive is actually proactive ahead of the issue. We started out to scale back on that. We actually grew it out. Originally, it was going to be like 30 days of what we would predict out to. Now we just kind of predict out to get a more accurate assumption of what's going to happen in your environment, because we realize that if that data is wrong or we didn't show fidelity of data and show exactly what's going through on that graph, we try to show a graph of like, hey, here's where your environment is and here's where it would be after it's completed. If that is not done to the comfortability of the admin, they're just not going to use it. So it's a waste of resources. They'll never look at it. When we talk to customers that weren't SolarWinds customers, we talked to, they were using some of the other competitors that are they've been in the space for a long time. One of the things that they did, the hugest hurdle that they had to overcome when using recommendations was that 5 to 6 month adoption period, where always at the end they were like, man, if I just started using this day one, well, the trick was to trust your job to allow that recommendation to do it, right? To customize it to the point that where you weren't getting recommendations for something that was in maintenance mode, or something that was a development, or something that was being brought in that where you were phasing out a legacy, SAN that was still providing data stores for you, where now it looked like open capacity and open performance capacity, and now it was telling you like, hey, put stuff there when in fact you're trying to get it off. So once they figured out those nuances of what was important to them, then they were able to trust the recommendation and move forward with it.
Are you able to set tags on any of your data or a custom dashboard where one application stack would be tagged, and if you looked into that, only the recommendations that are relevant to those hosts and virtual machines would show up, or is it all just kind of...
No, today the way we do it, so tags are something that we're actually actively working on. Like it would be tags in terms of what it's bringing in, whether that's from Hyper-V or from vCenter. But in terms of like filtering out what you're actually seeing in recommendations, we can filter out by the type of recommendation, the severity. So if all you wanted to see was high or critical issues, and the types of strategies we provide. So if it's a storage capacity, a host performance issue, workload balancing, or VM sizing, that's how you could filter those out, but not right now in terms of like if this was a tier 1 application and everything that was associated to your tier 1 application where the world would end if it went down, these are the recommendations that apply to it. No, not yet. It is something that, like, in part of that grouping is something we're looking at solving as a whole. And if you guys want to talk offline, we could probably talk more about that with Steve and I.